Salween in northeastern Tibet is also called the Nujiang in Chinese and the Nagshu or Black River in Tibetan. It's the shortest of the major rivers draining western China, only 1,500 miles long. Its source is a spring north of the town of Nagshu near the Tibet-Qinghai border at an elevation of about 17,000 feet. Earth Science Expeditions ran a first ascent of the Salween headwaters in 2000. Steve Curry of the Expedition Company had tried to run this stretch in 1995, but completion and filling of the Chalong Dam about 50 miles downstream from the town of Nagshu dried up the river. ESE was told the dam was on a large tributary flowing from the north, but found out the hard way that the dam was on the main stream after rowing halfway across a 6-mile-long reservoir in a strong upstream wind. Fortunately, the Chinese engineer in charge of the dam offered vehicles to help them portage around the 100-foot-high structure. The team consisted of Mike Conley and David Heddig, oarsmen, Lisa Nelowit, Phil Wegner, Gordon Bear, Phil Smith, Travis Wind, and Pete Wind in kayaks, and Leo Lee, their Chinese host, and Da Hua, their Tibetan interpreter, helped to row. With the exception of a few Class 3 rapids in a black rock canyon near Biru at the end of the 150-mile stretch, the river was a busy Class 2.5, dropping an average of 15 feet per mile. Initially, the flow was about 2,500 CFS, but heavy rains swelled it to 20,000 by the takeout on the 10th day. Except in the Black Rock Canyon stretch, the river flowed over gravels it had eroded from its own Ice Age deposits, so the scenery and culture were the most memorable events. The Salween flows through Kampa country in eastern Tibet. This group of Tibetans was a first line of defense and occasional offense against the Chinese over the centuries. They still harbor hard feelings about the invasion of 1950 and can be intimidating. They're tall for Tibetans, plus the men are excellent horsemen and they carry large, beautifully decorated knives. So for their Chinese host, Leo Lee, it was a Class 5 cultural experience. In one camp, the Kampas took their permit and wouldn't return it because it was written in Chinese, not Tibetan. They held it overnight, then the next morning they told them to stop at the county seat 10 miles downriver to get permission to continue. In general, however, the team was welcomed by the nomads and villagers they encountered. In June 2007, ESE and Last Ascents ran a first ascent of the Salween from Biru to Sading. Here the river makes a sharp bend to the south, then southeast, flowing through a deep canyon and metamorphic rocks along the northwest side of the 20,000-foot East Tibetan Alps. The team was led by Pete Wynn, oarsman, who helped train Chung Dak and Naming Wei. His son, Travis Wynn, kayaker, was co-leader, and his daughter Carmen and his wife Cindy Apple rode one of the cataracts. Sarge Preston rode the third cataract. Sarge's son James, Drew Kirk, and Ralph Buckley also kayaked, and Scott Sanderson was a trip videographer. Russian topos and Google Earth satellite image data indicated the 90-mile stretch of river had a moderate gradient of about 12 feet per mile for the projected June flows of 5,000 CFS. The Google Earth images were taken in the winter when the river is covered with ice. The team assumed that the river wouldn't freeze over where there were major rapids, but learned the hard way that ice can build up on rocks and form bridges over rapids, so it's not feasible to scout using winter satellite images. After 2 days of Class 2 to Class 3 rapids, they entered a narrow gorge with several Class 4 rapids and one Class 5 rapid. The Class 5 rapid was marginally runnable and couldn't be lined or portaged. There was a monastery on the cliff 500 feet above the last rapid, so they called it Om Gorge. It took them an entire day to go 3 miles. Of all of the canyons ESE has explored in Tibet, this one had the most abundant wildlife, and the team was blessed with dozens of spectacular side canyon waterfalls. Travis Wynn of Last Ascents and Eric Ladd from Big Sky, Montana led a first ascent of the Salween from Sading to Mari in September 2007. This was a large group, 16 total, including Craig Childs, a writer for Men's Journal. There were 4 rafts and 4 kayakers on the 180-mile expedition. Unfortunately, Tibet was experiencing an exceptionally high amount of rainfall, and the river was flooding when the team arrived at Sading. The river finally began to subside after 5 days of waiting it to put in. During this time, the team lived in tents provided by the local monastery, and for many participants, the extended interaction with the monks was a highlight of the expedition. Even after putting in on the declining flow, the river was estimated to be 30,000 CFS, a high flow for the average gradient of 12 feet per mile. Late the first day, they encountered a Class 5 rapid with huge waves that they called Waimea, after the giant surf waves of Hawaii. Fortunately, there was only one flip. Unfortunately, the river had subsided enough that beaches for camping had surfaced. In many respects, it was a dream trip. There were many large, fun, safe rapids, beautiful campsites, deep, narrow canyons, and occasional stunning views of the eastern Tibetan Alps towering 10,000 feet above the river. This canyon with its rapids and scenery is comparable to the Grand Canyon, and other than the Class 5 road to the put-in at Sa Ding and the Class 5 shuttle to Maui, it would be a great repeat trip. The last section of the Salween to be explored by boat was run in March 2008 by Jed Weingarten and Willie Kern. They encountered a floating drill rig, a sure indication that the Chinese are planning to build a dam in this stretch. Although the average gradient for the 100-mile stretch from Maui to Po is only 13 feet per mile, most of the drop occurs in the last 25 miles. Here the river begins its precipitous drop off the southeast edge of the Tibetan Plateau, passing around the eastern end of the East Tibetan Alps. In this stretch, there are multiple large Class 6 rapids caused by active landslides, so portaging was nearly as dangerous as kayaking. In March 2007, a team of 6 expert kayakers led by Travis Wynn, Willie Kern, and Jed Weingarten completed a first ascent of the 180-mile stretch of the Salween from Po to the Yunnan border. The other kayakers were Adam Elliott, Eric Southwick, and Oliver Deschler. This section of river has a high average gradient, 18 feet per mile, and the team lucked out with unusually low flows and great weather. The river flows through narrow gorges with numerous Class 5 rapids, and there are several portages. There's no trail along most of the river, so access to the occasional village high above the river is over 16,000-foot passes from the Mekong Canyon to the east. The complex geology as the river carves through the 20,000-foot high peaks of the Hingduan Mountains creates a wide variety of rapids and very colorful scenery. A team of expert big water kayakers led by Jed Weingarten boated the Salween from the Tibet-Yunnan border to the town of Gongshan, a distance of about 50 miles, in 2004. Also in 2004, Jed and his father Peter boated the Dulong River, which is the headwaters of the Irrawaddy River in far northwest Yunnan, south of this section of the Salween. In 1996, White Pearl Expedition organized the first ascent of the Salween in northwestern Yunnan. The American component included Phil Wagner, Dave Pizzuti, Scott Young, Brad Rosenzweig, and Greg Graubaugh as kayakers, and Dennis Schultz, Mike Coletta, and Fred Luthold as oarsmen, plus another 15 people, including several Chinese, took turns paddling the rafts. Phil Wagner later married one of them, Yu Juanjuan. He also kayaked on the 2000 Salween Headwaters Expedition and has run about one-third of the river in China. At low flows in October, the river carries about 30,000 CFS. The team ran about 150 miles with an average gradient of about 15 feet per mile. This is a roadside run, so they car camped. As a result, their light rafts often flipped in the larger rapids, and they wisely decided that only 2 of the kayakers, Scott Young and Dave Pizzuti, should run the largest rapid on the stretch, Leaping Tiger. Although very impressive, this rapid is not to be confused with Tiger Leaping Gorge in the Great Bend of the Yangtze, which is a 10-mile-long suicide run. The main purposes of the expedition were to help convince the Chinese to include the river canyon in a nature preserve and to show the Chinese that rafting could be a source of tourism revenue. It was partly successful. The Salween in northwest Yunnan is now part of Great Rivers National Park, but it has not been commercially run as of 2005. In 2004, the Yunnan government proposed to build 13 large dams that would essentially flood the entire river in Yunnan. The plan was seriously criticized by a rapidly growing Chinese environmental movement, and is now on hold pending a review by the federal government. Concern about public opinion is a rare occurrence in China and indicates increasing respect for the environment among their leaders.